All right. Very good morning to everybody this morning. If you want to go ahead and open up your Bibles to Luke chapter 14, that's where we're going to be this morning. Luke chapter 14. We are still in this. We're still having a little bit of difficulty with our technology, so just ask you to have a little bit of patience with us. We're striving to improve it, and sometimes that comes with growing pains. Yeah, this is a different one than that. In this particular class, we are studying the life of Christ. It's a chronological study of the various events in the life of Christ. Many Bibles have in the back of them a harmony of the gospel accounts. And you'll see Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John there. And there'll be various events, like when you think about the crucifixion, well, all four of them talk about that. But as you go through the entire life of Christ, what winds up happening is there are certain events that are only in one book. And as you can see in this chart of that harmony of the gospel accounts, we're in Luke chapter 14, where it shows all these different things that he's dealing with, like whenever it says he weeps for Jerusalem, he heals a man with dropsy, and things like that. Those are only found in the book of Luke. And so that's why we're studying this, and as we continue down through these events, sometimes it'll jump over to Mark, sometimes it'll jump over to Matthew, sometimes it'll be across 3 or 4. And so that's why we're studying it in this way. And we're currently in Luke chapter 14. It's where we've been for the last few weeks. And again, just showing you this summary of his life, his ministry. You can see where it's broken down into spring, summer, and fall. And we are in the winter time, that last little bit before Jesus goes into the spring, which then will take us into the Passover, which then begins his Passion Week. And so we're only halfway through the book of Luke, and that just shows you how much emphasis they put on the last few months of Jesus' life. So we are in Luke 14, and remember he was sitting at a table with Pharisees, and you know, anytime that Jesus gets invited over to dinner with the Pharisees, it usually turns into an event, a big event. Usually there's arguing and things like that goes on because they're always trying to capture him. Well, he is now, if we pick up in chapter 14, verse 25, he's been at this Pharisee's house. He's now leaving, and of course there's been people that gathered around, and that's the context of where we are. So let's read Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 25, all the way down to verse 33. All right, so read with me. Luke 14, 25 and forward. And great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest, after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all, then he cannot be my disciple. struggled with this, because you can teach the gospel. The gospel message is pretty easy to understand, but getting people to understand the difficult concepts of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus is an entirely different thing. Would you agree? You can understand the gospel. People can understand why they need to be saved from their sins, what that means. And most everybody wants to go to heaven. And so they're going to do that which is necessary to be able to be. That's why we always, when we talk about the gospel plan of salvation, we always say that Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, we add that to the end, live faithful until death. That's the really hard part. That's the part of counting the cost, and that's also the hardest concept to transmit to others. Again, while we were in Paraguay, we had the blessing to be able to teach the gospel to many people. We had lots of people coming into the church, but I started noticing a trend that at right about the 1 year mark, it seems like the zeal and the excitement and everything stayed with them, but right around the 1 year mark, that was the test. It seems like that's whenever the rubber really hit the road, literally out the door or moving forward as a disciple. I don't know what it is about that, but it seemed to be this cycle. So we started paying attention to that and trying to do everything we could to teach people the importance of this. Listen, religious confusion has distorted Christianity so much that it's hard for people to understand what it means to truly be a disciple of Christ. And so I hope, having said all that, you'll look at this now with me and let's see what we can learn to help those that we may have the opportunity to teach the gospel to. Have to count the cost. So it says that a multitude, verse 25, went with him, and he turned and said to them. Now think about that. You have Jesus, by now is extremely popular. Everybody knows about Jesus, knows who he is, and especially there around Jerusalem, they've all seen and heard the controversy. They've all seen and heard the miracles, and so more and more people are coming out. We just had him heal a man with dropsy, and so there's more people coming to see Jesus. So this multitude, imagine a lot of people, and Jesus turning around and talking to them. And that's when he starts talking about this. If anyone comes to me, talking about everybody out there, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. He's rebuking the crowd. Do you recognize that? Do you see that? He's rebuking or admonishing this crowd. Now, why would he do that? Because a lot of people like to be fans of Jesus, right? There's people out there who love the idea of Jesus. They love the idea of who he is and stuff like that. And so that's why you have all these things, these fans. It's popular to talk about him in a semi-scholastic way, right? It's even societies and groups like the Judeo-Christian way of life, but then to actually be one of Jesus' disciples, that's a whole nother story. I was just doing some curiosity Googling to see what's out there. Man, there's a ton of stuff. There's Bikers for Christ. I don't know anything about these groups, so I'm not saying that they're doing anything wrong. I'm just saying, think about the names. Bikers for Christ, and I kid you not, there's a group out there called Hookers for Jesus. All right, all right, Joey says. Hookers for Jesus. There's also a legitimate group that is registered called Queer for Christ. And that goes on and on and on. Now, again, I don't know these groups, and I'm certainly not going to judge them and say that they're wrong or anything else. But just the title alone makes me curious. Because what does Jesus want in his disciples? Purity. There you go. And it's not about being for Jesus. That's all I'm trying to say on that. So again, don't misrepresent. Again, I think Larry nailed it. It's priorities. There should be no one else. If you truly love Jesus, there should be no one else more important in your life. You know, this is Valentine's Day, and everybody got all mushy and everything. And even sitting, Andrea fixed me a wonderful meal with candles and everything. And oh my, in our house. And we were sitting there talking to each other and expressing our love to each other. And she said, you know, you are my life. And I said, well, you are my life too. And we both stopped and said, well, God first, Jesus first, and then you. We both recognized that. And that's exactly the way it should be. A husband or wife should be able to say that. Listen, I love you, but you know God's first in my life. Put Jesus before that's something right there, isn't it? For my own life. Now, he backs that up by saying, whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So not only are you to put me as first priority above family, above anybody else, even your own life, but take that life as bearing a cross. This is difficult, quite frankly, for us to really grasp with our 2020 glasses. Because you say the word cross to somebody in this day and age, AD 4, or whatever it is, or 30, I guess it'd be about 34. You say that, it would be the equivalent of saying, unless you're willing to go sit in the electric chair, right? Unless you're willing to take lethal injection. Isn't that what we do today? That's the method we use. And here's the other thing. It still doesn't ring the same for us to say, unless you're willing to go sit in the electric chair, unless you're willing to do lethal. How many of y'all seen, physically seen with your own eyes, lethal injection or an electric chair execution? Any of you? Okay, there's the difference. When he says take up your cross, that's the first thing that comes to these people's mind is this means of execution. And not only this means of execution, they can point right down the road and go like right over there. Because coming into cities there we're in the Roman Empire, a road, that's how they executed people. They hung them on crosses so that as you walked into the city, you see that they're not putting up with any nonsense. We don't do that, do we? Our public executions are quiet, private place somewhere, usually in a prison or something like that, and there's just a few witnesses, maybe on TV, but TV takes away that element of reality to us, doesn't it? So you see the impact? So when Jesus says, take up your cross, we say this very lightly, and we read over the Bible, don't we? Because what is the cross? It is a one-way ticket, right? A man who's going to take up his cross and carry it, what's that saying? You are on a one-way path to your execution, all right? You understand that now the context of what Jesus is saying? You want to be my disciple, you're on a one-way path, right? A one-way path. And you're willing to lay down your life. You're willing to sacrifice everything, that there is nothing left. A man who's picking up his cross and is on that one-way path, does he say, oh man, I forgot to pay the electric bill? Right? You don't do that, right? Oh, I need to go say goodbye to somebody, or I need to do this. You don't get to do that. That's what he's trying to say here. You pick up your cross. It is the burden that you have, and it is that much dedication. There's not even another option. You just continue forward. Have y'all ever thought about this passage in that way before? That if you want to be a Christian, it means that you need to be dedicated. I've known people who wanted to be baptized. I think some of you know some too, that wanted to be baptized, wanted to be added to the church, and then you never see them again. They have this idea that's like, this is the thing I need to do. I need to be saved. Worship. I mean, isn't worship a pretty important part of being a Christian according to the New Testament? Yeah. Isn't helping people alongside the church and being a part of the body another thing that's presented? Yeah. So people don't understand what it means to be counting the cost. What's your thoughts? What are you thinking now in regards to this? Or what's your take on counting the cost? Things that have been said.
If you live with your folks and all this time, you sort of have a definite attachment to them, and they don't have the same ideas about religion as you do. It gets to a point where you just gonna have to either make a choice, you or them, or you go have your path of wherever you're going, traveling through life.
Very good, Joey. And that's exactly what we saw. Again, we don't see that as much here as we saw it like down in Paraguay. And I explain why. Him saying this about taking up a cross to these people that are there are primarily what religion or what background are the people that's following Jesus? Jewish, right? Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 22 through 23 says that cursed is the man who is hung on a tree. They're going to have that in their mind too. And so this is extremely offensive and scandalous to say that. What? Because it represents Roman oppression, everything the Jews are against. And you want me to hang on a tree and that's to be your disciple? All of that plays into this. Yet, look what Paul says in Galatians chapter 2. And this is one of those verses that I like sometimes going into a church building that has the King James in the pews and go, let's sing a song. Everybody turn to Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. You remember that? Now, the New King James says it differently. But I've been, what? Crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Now, that's another thing that we need to understand looking back now with our 2020 glasses that they didn't know at this time is that cross that Jesus died upon was not his cross, was it? Whose cross was it? Whose cross is it? It's our cross. That cross that he died upon is your cross, my cross, all of humanity. And so you can put your name on that, and that's what he died for. And so whenever we talk about making priority number one, we live in America, we are so independent. There's a lot of independence, and that this is hard to explain to people who have seen and lived and know nothing but that. But that's not the way the rest of the world is, and it's not the way it was back then. And I got a glimpse of this in Paraguay, and some of my Latina brethren and sisters would understand this, but in South America, Catholicism is huge. It's huge. And not so much that people go to, that they're Catholic and they go to Catholic Mass all the time. It's an identity. It's who they are. And they've been brought up and taught to never, let me rephrase that. They've been taught to always be loyal to the Catholic Church, period. Period. And so, for a child, or let's just say, some of the people I studied with, I've told you this before, I've had people get all the way through the study, showing them in their Bible what they need to do, and they'll say to me, Troy, because I'll ask them, hey, why won't you be baptized? I mean, why don't you be added to the church? You know everything. I know what the Bible says. I know that if I want to be saved, I got to be added to the church through the gospel plan of salvation. I know that this is the church, the Bible, and everything, but my family would disown me. We don't really have that problem in America. I mean, there's a little bit. There are some that would be pretty upset, but not for that reason. I mean, when they say they will disown them, isn't that right, Miss Elsa? They will be put out of the family, completely put out of the family. We can't imagine that. Well, that's the same thing you have here in this day and age. They would be completely put out of the family if they follow Jesus. Remember what remember that when we were studying John chapter 9 a couple of months ago, and they called in the parents of that blind man who was healed, and they wouldn't speak up. Why? Because they were afraid of being kicked out of the synagogue. Because if they identify with Jesus, it means that they are going to be ostracized. Nobody wants that, right? You following along what's going on here and how important it is to be a disciple of Jesus? Comments? Questions? All right, continue along. He now uses a couple of parables to help us understand what this means. I love Jesus' teaching is so far superior to anything we could ever come up with. And he uses a parable, which is an earthly object, to teach a heavenly concept. And in my Bible, in verse 28, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost? I got that circled. And what that is, it's showing me that's the whole message of this entire passage right here, verses 25 to 33. Don't sit down and count the cost, whether there's enough to finish it, lest after he laid the foundation, it says that he's not able to finish it, and all begin to mock him. So, what is the most important part in the beginning of a building? The foundation, right? Stop and think about that for a second. You build a foundation, but that's not the only part. It's a very important part, and it's an expensive part, but it's just one part. That's not the whole building. That's not the whole thing. There's a lot more to it. Even building the walls, that's not all there is to it. Even the roof, that's not all there. There's more and more and more to finish that out. And if any of you have built a house or have been involved in any kind of construction like that at all, you know it's expensive. And you have to sit down and you have to work all this out and look and see, well, can we afford this? Can we do this? Because there's all kinds of other expenses. I mean, wow. It ain't just the house that costs you money. And, it's all them lawyers and all the other people and the government and everybody else who's got to get their piece of the pie too. There's a lot of money involved. So if you didn't plan well, and let's say you buy a prominent piece of property right over here in the corner of Carolina and Stewart Street. Everybody's going to see that, right? Because everybody comes this way and this way. They're going to see it, right? Let's just imagine right over here where the Burger King is. You get that property, and you're going to build a house, and you lay the foundation, and then all of a sudden, you're out of money and you got nothing else to do, and there's just a foundation right there, and everybody in town is going to know whose foundation that is, aren't they? And what are we going to think?
Somebody took my Burger King.
Oh, sorry, Joey. Just think about a foundation, driving by somewhere and just seeing nothing but the foundation, a new foundation, and that's it, nothing else. Or even, let's say, go even further. There were some buildings down in Paraguay that was like that. In fact, there was a house in Paraguay that was the exact replica of the White House in Washington, D.C., an exact replica. It was being built by the dictator's son, and then when he was ousted in 1989, the house was never finished. It didn't ever get the windows put in or anything like that. You could drive, it's gone now, but I remember taking, I think Joe, didn't I take you by? Took Joe by there, and you could peer over the wall, and you could see there's homeless people living in it and stuff like that, in the White House, in Paraguay. So, but it was a laughing stock. People laughed at it because he didn't finish. You understand what he's saying there? You need to think about what you're going to do. And then he has another one. So the first one is about building, and then the second one he says, or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider, and he's counting the cost, whether he's able. 2, either fight. These are the options that he has according to what's written here. The fight or run or negotiate. All right? Those are your 3 options. You either need to stand up and fight, you need to run, or you need, if you're not capable of fighting somebody, it says they have 20,000, right, versus his 10,000. He's kind of at a disadvantage. He can't run. You know, where's he going to go? Because maybe he's not very fast. You know, so what you better do? You better start talking, right? You better start negotiating, figuring out. Yeah, please don't hurt me or something. All right, not any guarantee they won't. Point being is that you need to consider it before you go out against this person to fight. All he's trying to get you to understand is to count the cost, to count what happens in real life. All right? So, here's the point. Men build kingdoms by force, right? How many nations or kingdoms have you ever known that just appeared because everybody decided, hey, let's just get together and have a kingdom, right? Doesn't happen that way, does it? Not even the United States, right? We fought a war in order to be who we are. Now, interestingly enough, Paraguay, they did the same thing. They had, kind of like we did, they had some people that were like Thomas Jefferson and all of them, and they got together and they drafted a Declaration of Independence. And they went to the governor's house, and this was late at night, and they rolled a cannon right up to his door. And they walked up and knocked on the door, and he comes out, and they present him this Declaration of Independence. He looked at them, he looked at the cannon and said, so be it. And that was, I think somebody did shoot a gun out of excitement, you know, so there was a shot fired. But but still, it wasn't peaceful. There was still a cannon, right? So men, here's the point, men create kingdoms by force. You follow what I'm saying there? What is Jesus doing? How is he creating his kingdom? Yes. He wants you coming voluntarily. He wants in peace, and he wants you coming on your own free will. He's not doing it by force. Now, we've talked about this many times. What is the idea that the Jews have about the Messiah? How do they picture the Messiah? A conqueror, a military king, somebody who's going to come in and restore order. And they kind of get that from their history, Judas Maccabeus, who did that, right? They kind of think that might be something along those lines. And that is not the kingdom that Jesus is building. And so this idea of what does it mean to follow Christ? So what does following Christ cost you? Have you ever thought about that? You may not have had to leave your family. Andrew and I have experienced that. We've got family members that don't really have anything to do with us because we're Christians, and they don't like that lifestyle because they like their sinful lifestyle. Have y'all experienced anything like that? Have you experienced, what does it cost you to be a Christian? Does it cost? I see your head shaking, Jeff. What's it cost you? Yes. That's exact. I've got friends that I know. In fact, so most of you know that I left the church and I lived a pretty worldly life. And so I've got about 3 phases in my life. And so it's funny when Facebook, started getting real popular and everything, and I joined Facebook. All of a sudden, we're getting all these friend requests. And most of my friends from my childhood, they're like, "Hey, Troy, I knew you would be a preacher one day." That was their reaction. All my college buddies are like, "Hey, Troy, party." You're a what? And so I don't have a whole lot of my college friends because I'm a Christian. That's a good point, Jeff. Any others? What else has it cost you? Has it ever cost you a job? Has it ever cost you, talk about family members? Has it cost you comfort? Could it cost you your life? If you go over to Iraq or Iran, I should say Iran, well, parts of Iraq and Syria and stuff like that, there's people over there that because you're a Christian, if you're in the wrong place, they're going to kill you. Why? Because you're a Christian. Unless you renounce that, they're going to kill you. And so that has never gone away, by the way. I don't know if you've ever noticed that or known that, but there's always been, since Jesus ascended back to heaven and the church began, there has always been those who would kill and persecute people because they wear the name of Christ. And so we often, there's another interesting story I heard one time. These 2 guys busting into a church building with AK-47s, shooting up. Everybody who, trying to forget, make sure I get this punchline right. Everybody who doesn't believe in Jesus or who isn't ready to die for Jesus, leave now. And man, tons of people fled out the doors. A handful of people stayed. And then the gunman said, "All right, preacher, these are the real ones you can preach to." And they left. That's a weird story that I heard somewhere one time. It kind of made me think, what would I do in a situation like that, right? I mean, have you ever thought about it? I believe most of you that are here have that conviction that you're willing to die for your faith. But you also know a lot of people who find reasons to not be at church on Sunday morning. Find a million reasons to not come. Or find a million reasons to do everything else except, practice Christianity. Jesus is saying, don't be like the world. The world calls us to do what? What's the world's message? What does the world teach us that we should be doing to be successful and to have a good life? To gain, right? We need to gain. We need to get money. We need to get possessions. We need to get things, right? What is Jesus telling you to do? Get rid of it all, right? Huh? Yeah, which often means getting rid of everything. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go get rid of your possessions. All right, it's not what he means, but where are your priorities? Where are your priorities? How are you using those possessions and things like that? All right. Any other questions, comments on this? I know you've heard this passage before, but I hope this morning we've kind of opened it up a little bit more for you. I see some head shaking. Good. All right, let's continue. He says in verse 34, he continues, still teaching, and it's still connected here. He says, "Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears, let him hear." Now, why would he say this? This is actually a famous saying, and you've heard this before. Luke here adds throwing it out into refuse, into the dunghills, he says. But think about salt. Do you know anything about chemistry? Does anybody know what salt is and what's its chemistry? Sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is one of the most stable elements, all right? Salt does not lose its flavor. Salt always has its flavor, always. It's so stable It's always going to have that flavor. Have you ever put salt on something and went, this salt doesn't have any flavor to it? Have y'all ever done that? No, because salt always tastes salty. So what's he saying? He's saying basically this like something that looks like salt, but is not. And think about this, if you were to take some white substance and put on your food, right, that you expected to be salty and it did nothing, and then you taste it and it had no flavor, what would you do with it? You'd throw it out, right? So what's Jesus saying? In context of counting the cost, how would you apply this? I've got what I think it is. Let me see what you think. How does this apply in the context of counting the cost of being his disciple?
Be ye doers of the word, not hearers only.
That's good. Be doers of the word, not hearers only. Any other comments, thoughts?
In that verse where it says, and the salt has lost its savor, I thought it was because the salt usually preserves.
Salt does preserve. It sure does.
Keeps things.
It does.
I thought, I don't know, I think it should, somehow or other, it saves something. And I figured.
That is a different application of that. You're exactly right. But in this case, when he's talking basically about being real salt or not real salt, you see that? There's the difference. He's saying that, salt has a flavor and it's useful. There's another element that may look like salt, has no flavor. What's it for? Toss it out. Does you see how this connects now with counting the cost? In other words, walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk. Don't just call yourself a Christian. Remember what we said at the beginning? That some people they're fans of Jesus. They're not necessarily Jesus' disciples. They are for Jesus, but are they of Jesus? And Jesus is saying here, don't just dress or look the part, be the part. Be my disciple. Make sense? All right, I hope that helps clear that up a little bit. We only got about 5 minutes, but I think we got time. Let's go ahead and read. He continues. He's still on the same subject. He is still talking about being his disciple, but now he brings in a different aspect of it, and that is another parable that everybody's familiar with, and the parable of the lost sheep. Verses 1 through 7 in chapter 15. Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him, and the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So he spoke this parable to them, saying, what man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which was lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. So, right on the tails of talking about counting the cost, Jesus has all these tax collectors and sinners drawing near to him, it says. And the Pharisees see that, and they go, he receives, I'm putting words in the Bible there, that he receives sinners and eats with them. The reason I put that in there is because what are they doing? Well, yeah, he does that, but what are they insinuating? What are they insinuating? Well, they're insinuating they're better than them, but what are they insinuating about Jesus? There you go, the old phrase, birds of a feather flock together. You know what they say. Oh, Jesus, he's a tax collector and a sinner. That's what they're trying to implicate him as. And so, that's why he speaks this parable, and he is talking directly to them. When he says, how many of you, having 100 sheep, loses one? Now, again, this is with our 20/20 glasses, we don't identify quite as quickly as they do, but you think about the people, where is he? He's out in the wilderness, right? Outside of Jerusalem and everything. Guess what's around him? Lots of sheep. These people knew lots and lots about sheep. Very common trade, agrarian society that they live in. They probably either had sheep, know people have sheep, and they probably know just as well as anybody that, yep, sometimes sheep get lost because sheep don't pay attention. They put their head down and they're eating, and they're just eating, and next thing you know, they may be eating, and all of a sudden they look up and they're nowhere around. All the other sheep are gone. Typically what a sheep does when it finds itself in that position is it lays down and just starts bleating, like making noises so that it'll be found. And so there's probably been a bunch of people that are sitting right there that's been on a sheep hunt, that's lost a sheep or been with somebody who lost a sheep who go out and find the sheep. So he leaves the sheep, right? Not likely he left them by themselves. He probably left those with some other folks or something, and then goes out and finds this one sheep and then puts it on his shoulders. Well, there's a picture a lot of us have seen many times, right? This is a picture that you can even find in the old ancient catacombs in Rome, stuff like that, of this picture of the sheep on the shoulders. Brings them back, and they rejoice. Now, why? Come on, man, you had 100. What's one little sheep going to matter? It's important. I mean, it's a commodity, right? Has value. Does it have value? Right. Every single one has value. And we're like that. If we lose something and we find it, don't we get excited? Hey, let's say you had $1,000 in the bank. $1,000, right? But then, let's just say and say you have $1,000 and you're counting, all of a sudden you're missing 20. What are you going to do? It's only $20. Sure. They do that, right? Whoa, where's my 20? I got a 20 missing. Who took my 20? Where's my 20? And you're going to start looking, trying to recount it and everything else. Sheep are the same way. They're a commodity. And so he finds them. But what's he saying whenever he's talking about that? I say to you, likewise, there's more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. That's a direct remark to those Jewish Pharisees that are standing there. Saying, you mock me, or you want to say this because I'm with sinners? Well, aren't these the ones who God loves just as much as you? You may be doing everything right, but what about these people? And so he's going to continue this. This isn't the only time that he's going to talk about. This whole chapter talks about lost and saved, and we'll pick up on that next week. Thank you so much for your attention. We're now going to take time and prepare for our worship service.